Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. To support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eyes On. And we're really, I'm going to jump right into our guests and then we'll intro the other two. Not that the other two are less important, but we're very excited to have Bill Gage back on today, an old friend of the Team House. Also was a senior Secret Service officer. Actually, that's not the right word, is it? But nevertheless, senior within the Secret Service under two presidents, Bush 43 and Obama. But also is just a guy who is really can lay out the some of the complexities of providing security, which is a lot more than many the public realized what goes into all of this. So anyway, I'm welcome again. I'm Andy Milburn.
Jason Lyons.
I'm Dave Park, it says, but it says I'm Dimitri Kontakos. And Bill, thanks again for Bill. He jumped on with us on Saturday, like last minute, right after it happened too. And he gave us like 15 minutes or so of while things were like super fluid and still happening. So I appreciate that, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah. And like my running joke, who says the Team House doesn't have breaking news. So
yeah,
I did that from the parking lot of a grocery store.
That's awesome.
With my son in the seat next to me in my truck. So definitely a very raw, kind of rough street interview there. So thanks for having me. I'm a big fan of the Team House, and I do listen to the Team House and to Jason, you and Andy's new podcast as well. So I'm a big fan.
Thanks, Bill.
Great, Bill. Well, before you have to rush off to all the other things and other audiences who are clamoring for your time, what happened and why?
Yeah, so my running joke with my son, who's 15, is he could probably sit here and give this interview because he's heard me say the same things over and over again to the New York Times, Fox News, Washington Post. I did an NPR interview this morning. I did the BBC. Andy, from your home country, I did the BBC here a little bit ago. So, clearly an attack, right? An assassination attempt on a major American political figure, the Republican nominee for president, who happens to also be a former president. So, if we want to back up, like most Americans, I was going about my life, and a buddy of mine texted me and said, "Hey, you better turn on the news." I turned on the news, and I was watching just moments after it happened, and was talking to my wife, and I said, "Hey, I don't know how somebody could have gotten a gun into the event. It must have been like a 3D printed gun, maybe like a homemade gun. Somehow subverted the magnetometer checkpoints, somehow got the weapon in." I was watching more and more video, and then I'm thinking, did somebody throw a rock or a cell phone? Because the audio hadn't been released yet, right? So it was just the video of the incident. And then, of course, as more video and then the gunshots are being released, you're getting the audio of the gunshots. I'm thinking to myself, well, all right, so now I'm thinking somebody in an elevated position with a, I don't want to use the term sniper rifle, but somebody in an elevated position with a rifle firing shots. So then, I'm watching the video, and we really did do a bio on here, Andy and Jason. I've been on here a number of times, but I was on the counter assault team for 6 years. The counter assault team is a pretty elite unit within the Secret Service, really formed after the Reagan assassination to counter. The Secret Service operates on this protective principle that you learn day one of special agent training, which is a maximum to the protectee, minimum to the problem. All right. So what that means is, if you're around the protectee, you're on the shift, as the Secret Service calls it. I think in England, Andy, they call it close protection. So if you're immediately around the protectee, don't necessarily draw your gun and return fire. You want to give cover to that protectee. You want to cover them with your body and evacuate them away. So CAT's mission is the opposite, which they want to actually, CAT's mission is divert, suppress, neutralize. It's actually in their sort of mission profile. So they want the bad guy to actually, hey, someone's shooting at me. It's not the people around the president. CAT wants to draw their attention and then suppress that attack. So the guys on black that you see on the stage, those are members of the counter assault team that I was a member of for 6 years. So yeah, clearly someone was able to get access to an elevated position and get some shots off. If you listen to the timing, the shots ring out. You see Trump grab his ear, and within milliseconds, a second or two, the counter snipers are now engaging him and actually eliminate him, right? Eliminate the threat. They kill him. The counter sniper unit, the CS unit, is a very storied unit in the Secret Service. They were stood up after the Kennedy assassination. The Secret Service is divided into two sections. You have the uniform division, and then you have the agent side. It's just the way it's evolved over time. Don't ask me why it became that way, but it's just the way it is. Kind of like the Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy or whatever. It's just the way it is. CS, some of the best shooters in the world. Their qualification course, one of the final qualification go or no go exercises for them is, I can't remember, but it's, shooting a bullseye at 500 yards in like 3 seconds or something, from a standing, dropping to a kneeling. I forget their requirements, but they have very stringent requirements. So if you listen to the sounds of those gunshots, you hear CS engaging him almost immediately. And there's been some media reports. I had a source hit me up that said one of the rounds shot him right in the mouth. And so you guys know this, the brain is the CPU, right? And you want a headshot in that sort of attack, right, to immediately drop the threat. Law enforcement generally trains, right, a high target area in here, but those sniper shots want to do that triangle, right, the imaginary line here from your forehead down to your mouth. I know that's pretty gruesome, but that's just the truth of the matter. So, they eliminated the shooter pretty quickly. The shift, those around President Trump that are assigned to the Trump protective detail, they responded exactly as trained. If you watch the video, within a second or two of the first shot, they're jumping on stage. They're covering, I think we might have maybe talked about this a little, D, on Saturday, but it's draped in sort of a flag decorative material around the stage. The Secret Service calls that a dais, but that's ballistic steel around, and it's specifically designed for the protectee to duck behind. And the podium, or the dais as a service call it, is actually ballistic as well. And you can actually see one of the agents tries to move it out of the way, and it doesn't really, he tries to kind of like kick it, and it doesn't really move. You can see that in the video because it's really heavy.
Nice. Bill, I've got a question very quickly on that.
Yeah. And sorry to ramble on. My wife tells me I take too long to answer questions.
No, absolutely. No, we trust me, we like that kind of rambling.
All right. Andy, I'll tell my wife that she was wrong.
100%. Most wives are most of the time. Where was that? Yeah. So the counter sniper piece, I would imagine, is, incredibly challenging. I'd be interested, what you can tell us about. In this particular instance, arguably the problem was relatively easy, right? It was an AK, so it was I don't mean relatively easy. I don't, but I meant it could have been much more difficult if the guy was, was trained, had a sniper weapon, and that increases the potential radius of places that he can, he can locate. How does the Secret Service, when you guys are so, in a sense, dependent on local law enforcement, for those outer cordons, how do you crack that problem? I mean, location of a sniper, a serious shooter, further range. Yeah,
a lot to unpack there, Andy. So the first thing is the advanced work. Okay, so CS, the counter snipers, they are part of the Secret Service advanced team. The Secret Service, the most elite protective agency in the entire world. Every single agency around the world that provides protection to the world's elected leaders models themselves on the Secret Service protective model and Secret Service protective methodology. So the Secret Service has developed this advanced, it's been around since the Secret Service, in the 40s and 50s. They started sending agents out well ahead of the protectee or the president, vice president. So a lot of what you're talking about, how do we mitigate these long-range threats, are handled during the advance. You have the CS guys going out and looking at getting up and very high vantage points. I was a part of many advance teams, and CS was sort of a sister unit to CAT. We worked hand in hand with them, and their call sign is Hercules is the call sign for the CS units. And a lot of times they would get up on a very high elevated position. They would have to get on a jerry lift. Sometimes they would climb up. They would get a fire truck. We'd ask the local fire department to lift them up, and they would get way high up so they could actually see down off into the distance and see exactly what you're talking about, hiding points. Because obviously they're thinking, and I'm not a sniper. Obviously, I was on CAT, but I can kind of understand some of the lingo here. But it's almost when the CS guys are doing the advance, they're kind of thinking like, okay, sniper versus sniper, right? If I were a sniper, where would I go hide? And so if they see places, then they try to block that line of sight with a school bus, maybe a garbage truck. Sometimes you'll see those at events. So that's how the Secret Service, in particular, the CS guys, try to mitigate that threat, is during the advance work, and just spend hours up at that elevated position with binoculars looking around, thinking, hey, if I were a sniper, where would I attack from? So that's really how they mitigate that threat.
When the shot gets taken, how do they, for instance, like yesterday, how did they locate him so quickly?
Well,
Was
I
it
think
because known shooting positions, it's likely shooting positions, and they
well,
already.
It's a great question, Andy, and it's a question. I was actually speaking with a reporter just before I came on with you guys, and I think for me that is a very important question that I would be asking. And let me be long-winded here, and I'll circle back. All right, every single Secret Service event I've ever been on. And I was part of hundreds, if not thousands, of these types of events during my career. There was always an issue during the event, right? Someone would report a suspicious person. Hey, I think this guy has a gun. There's an unattended package over here that looks like a bomb. Every single event I was at, there was always something coming over the radio from the command post. So, and I can tell you a couple times, did I tell the Martha's Vineyard story, the paintballers?
I don't,
okay.
not the other day. So yeah, please.
Oh, okay. I thought it. So to give you an example of the kind of things that happened during these events. So in 2008 or 2009, Obama was a very young president. He goes to Martha's Vineyard for the summer. I was on the CAT team. We had 4 CAT teams for that trip, for 4 separate shifts. So the day Obama arrives, I'm assigned the CAT team I was on, Charlie Squad. We were assigned to cover his arrival at the airport on Martha's Vineyard. So we're taking our positions, waiting. Air Force One's on approach. They're probably about a minute and a half to wheels down, and one of the CS guys comes over the radio and says, "Hey, I've got a group of armed men wearing camouflage with painted faces with rifles running into the wood line towards where Air Force One is going to be wheels down." All right. So holy shit, man. What are we going to do? So the standard procedure that the service has developed over time is they have a unit called CS Response, which is going to be an agent with a uniformed police officer or multiple police officers will then respond to what they saw. They're not going to immediately just start firing. We're not going to cause an incident by, telling the plane, hey, you can't land, do a touch and go. The media is there lined up with cameras. So major incident here, right? And potentially embarrassing to the president. And so in this case, the decision was made, and this is all happening within seconds. The decision's made, let Air Force One land. We'll hold Obama on the plane till we sort this out. The plane lands. the Massachusetts state troopers go over there, and it turned out it was a group of weekend paintballers that had no idea that Obama was landing there, right? All the guns were paintball guns, just a bunch of soccer dads, right? Trying to do their LARPing for the weekend. And so I sorry to be long-winded and answer the question, Andy, but you know, those kind of things happen during these events. And so, you know, I'm asking the same question. I think it broke late yesterday that a police officer actually climbed up a ladder to confront the gunman. And so I don't know if the CS guys were the ones that said, hey, local police, you need to go investigate. There's a guy on a roof. Or if there's video now, unfortunately, I hate to say where I got the source, but there's video on TMZ where they were actually, someone captured the guy crawling up onto the building. So I don't know if someone grabbed the attention of local police and said, hey, what's this guy up to? Or if the CS guy said, hey, can somebody go check him out? What's he up to? And so either way, the Secret Service system worked. It just was a few seconds too late.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it thank goodness someone, it was an impressively fast response was my point really there too. And having been on the receiving end of snipers before, I know how difficult it is, especially in an urban environment, especially with crowds, to locate point of shot. So that was remarkable.
So my educated guess here, Andy, my professional educated guess is it came on the radio that we have a suspicious guy up here. So CS's attention was already drawn over there. Yeah. They were probably looking at this guy. The CS guys have very sophisticated binoculars, and they looked, holy shit, that guy's got a gun. Oh my God, he's firing. They returned fire and killed him. I mean, I just broke that down, into the 5 seconds there that, you can hear the audio. So it literally happened. Some version of that is what my educated professional guess is.
So presumably after this, the Secret Service does a kind of an after action review. Probably, I don't know if they call it that or not. What sort of things would you be looking at in this particular incident if you were involved?
The FBI is in charge of the criminal investigation. Okay, we had an assault on a former president. So that's a criminal, that's against the federal criminal code. So there's going to be, the FBI is handling criminal investigation. Now, what went wrong will be handled by the Secret Service. I'm sure there's going to be, I think Biden has called now for a congressional investigation. So the things that I would be looking at, would be, hey, what footprint, what social media footprint did this guy have? Were there any indications by anyone? Was any of suspicious behavior reported? Was he posting on anything that was problematic or worrisome? Was this an unusual interest? Typically the Secret Service teaches sort of in threat management or threat assessing, typically people just don't snap. They don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to be an evil madman. That happens over time, right? And a lot of times, Jason, I think in the intel community, they call it like leakage or whatever, right? These people are going to leak out behaviors that are going to draw attention. So that's the first thing is the secret, were there any indications of what this guy's motives were beforehand? So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing is during the advance work, did anybody recognize, hey, those buildings need to be covered? So
interesting you said that. So, and like NBC just reported that like
I saw that
was a security risk.
Yeah, and it was supposedly covered by local law enforcement. But I've had the same conversation with multimedia outlets. There's a law enforcement recruiting crisis in the United States, and the Secret Service is not immune from that. Okay, and they're way short-staffed for what they need to be, and we're short-staffed when I was there. And listen, it's not like you see on the movies. Okay, everybody walking into that event is not like facial recognition software that's run through a national database, and the Secret Service pulls up their DNA, on some database, and there's not hundreds of CS teams out there that are coordinating drones flying overhead that have missiles. It doesn't work like that. And so the Republican convention starts today. there's probably 30 CS teams at that in Milwaukee covering that event. Biden was supposed to speak today at the LBJ Library, I believe in Austin, Texas. That's been canceled. There was probably 4 CS teams at that. So what I'm explaining to you guys is that the Secret Service, supply is exceeding demand here, or demand is exceeding supply, I should say. So there's limited resources. So the Secret Service has to pick and choose. Hey, we only have a finite number of CS teams, and this is all we can devote to this Trump event. So one of the things I would be looking at, Andy, is who made that decision that 2 CS teams was enough for that event?
But I mean, let me ask you something, Bill. I mean, I know obviously in hindsight, it's obvious, but why, like, if that roof is a security issue, why not plant, a couple state troopers or local law enforcement guys in the parking lot and a couple on the roof, and like just make sure nobody fucks about?
Yeah, and great question. And it sounds like if the reporting is true, that was probably requested. But here's the other thing: when you work with local police agencies, like I said, I was on dozens and dozens of advance teams. Those local police agencies are also going through a recruiting crisis, right? And they have limited resources. In perfect world, those law enforcement agencies would give you 500 cops to go do whatever. But guess what? They still have to answer 911 calls. They still have to respond. They still have to patrol their assigned areas. So they have limited resources too. So there might have been 1 or 2 officers for that entire complex. So, when you work with an agency like the NYPD, I only have awesome things to say about the NYPD. I had great experiences up there. I think I joked with you guys on one of your shows, D, about you get a lot of attitude from the NYPD when you need something. It's like, hey, all right, we'll get to you. Hey, whatever. But man, if you say, hey, I need a few cops, you walk into a room and there's 500 there, and some precinct commander's like, hey, here's the guys you requested. Where do you want them? But not every agency has those type of resources.
I was going to ask you that too, Bill. If in situations like this, do they just say all hands on deck, local law enforcement, or are they handpicked?
No, it's all hands on deck for these agencies. And the smaller the agency, the bigger the sort of requirement that is. So, I haven't looked at this local agency in Pennsylvania. I imagine, Pennsylvania is divided into these townships. So I imagine it's you could probably look that up right now, D, to see what the population of that town is, and what the local agency probably has to ask for county resources, the Pennsylvania State Police. So it's limited resources on the local side too, guys.
Yeah, it's a town of 13,000.
Yeah. So, if they have their own police department, I would imagine it's 10 officers or less, so they're probably going to be asking for a county police department and then Pennsylvania State Police support. But, the other thing too is, each aspect of Trump's movements require more and more local resources. You have to have guys in the motorcade securing the motorcade route. You have to have, police escorts. You have to have local police officers at the airport for the arrival and departure. So it's really a drain on resources. And so a lot of times, when you have a natural disaster, that's why the president will usually say, hey, I don't want to go to that natural disaster right away, because my visit will draw so many resources from the local agencies that need to sort of provide police protection to, the citizenry.
It's like when the president travels, it's how many C-17s does it take to support him? When I
went to Mumbai, India, there were like 11 C-17s that came to Mumbai.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's not as though he can, just go down range to visit the troops and it not have any impact other than on morale.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the war zone trips that the different presidents took, where Obama was smuggled out of the White House one time, so was President Bush, and even then, when he gets on Air Force One, is trying to take a classified trip. Air Force One releases this like well-known signature, right? Both visually, and then I think they have to acknowledge over the radio to the different towers around the world what they are. Plus, they had. I'm trying to think of the term, like combat air patrol is not the right term. You guys might know, but like there's going to be a fighter escort, right, around Air Force One. So those also, all these towers around the world are going to be like, hey, is that Air Force One, right? Like, why does this plane have, 10 F-18s, flying with it? But anyway, yeah, it's a big footprint wherever the president travels.
I mean, typically, how big is the Secret Service detail when he goes overseas?
A relative question, Andy, because you're going to have agents assigned to the individual detail. So if it's the
Right.
president's detail, PPD, you're going to have agents that are on a different shift, depending on how long he's going to be there. You might have 3 shifts, that might be close to 50 agents, but you're also going to have the post standers, which are sort of the junior agents that go to secure the site, the individual sites where the president's going to go. So for an overseas visit like India, I mean, there's probably close to 500, 700 agents involved in that one visit.
It's like a battalion of agents.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. And I think I told a story on one of the appearances, D, where somebody put the wrong gas into the president's limo.
Yeah.
So the president travels with these like mechanics from General Motors, and these are like the world's most efficient, productive, knowledgeable GM mechanics that had to tear this engine apart overnight and put it back together in an airport hangar. So, I mean, there's those kind of people that travel with the president as well.
it's a massive entourage.
Yeah.
So, Bill, I mentioned that when you went through training, I mean, you focused on. I mean, I imagine that the 81. It was 1981, right? The Reagan attempted assassination. Yeah. I imagine that becomes, the center point of more than one class, right? I mean, it's focusing on using examples from that. Do you see that happening again here? I mean, is this going to become an iconic event that's taught? And or does it really depend what comes out?
A lot's going to depend on what comes out, but sort of, I don't want to say my running joke, but I have this sort of discussion I have with people where I say, hey, when I joined the service in 2002, training was designed around, the agent training was designed around, and I'm going to go way back here. Everyone was worried about Carlos the Jackal, who was an actual terrorist that was running around the world that no one could find. And so it was like, all of the Secret Service protective models were sort of set up for Carlos the Jackal, this lone terrorist gunman out there.
70s. This was.
What'd you say?
70s. So just D. It was before D was born. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So before you were born, D, there was this guy running around the world.
Carlos I know who Carlos the Jackal is, guys. Jesus.
That's very interesting. So kind of a lone wolf.
Lone
with
wolf
no
terrorist.
Local connections, no social media background.
That's right. All of that. Yeah. And I mean, I'm going way back, like, some of the terrorist attacks that were studied were like the Red Faction in East Germany. Like, didn't they kidnap the president of BMW or something?
Hans Martin Schleyer. It was BMW, Mercedes. Yeah.
So like these were what was studied, but as I was coming on in 2002, this was quickly changing, right? Because I was there 6 months after 9/11. So we had this sort of mentality change of, hey, we only not have to worry about this lone gunman, but we also have to worry about an Al-Qaeda armed organized attack by terrorist groups. So it slowly became, that threat sort of morphed into being prepared for both, right? A lone gunman, a lone assassin on a rope line somewhere as the president is shaking hands, but also this armed organized assault by a group of individual terrorists. So which, was Al-Qaeda, then became ISIS. And, something that's not really talked about, it's been mentioned in a few books, but I was there when this happened. But in Denver, there were a group of white supremacists in 2008 when Obama was getting the Democratic nomination in Denver, sort of the coronation, if you will, where he officially takes the nomination. Just a day or two before that, a group of white supremacists aligned with the Hells Angels, they tried to ram through a police checkpoint one night that were around, I think it's in Vesco Field now. I think back then it might have been Coors Field at Mile High. I forget what the name used to be, but they tried to ram through a police checkpoint to assault the event, led the police on a high-speed chase, and then those guys were subsequently arrested. So I bring that story up to say that, Also, homegrown terrorism now has to be also recognized as a threat because the Secret Service, right? I mean, with this current political climate, right, wrong, or indifferent, there are people out there that literally hate both candidates, and will actually, just because of the environment, they'll actually, take actions, sort of that, we call it the pathway to violence, right? They're going to ascend that pathway to violence just because of their political ideology.
Great.
Yeah. So what happens now? I mean, like, I'm going to do a little bit of speculation, like within the Secret Service. I mean, I know everyone's doing the blame game. Like, you kind of got some reports, like the FBI is like saying the Secret Service fucked up, and the Secret Service is saying, like, local law enforcement fucked up, which it kind of seems like it did. Like, what happens now in terms of, like, for lack of a better term, heads rolling?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is there's probably a lot of people yesterday night or this morning. A lot of agents were probably like, God damn it. Because, there's probably hundreds of agents all over the country that got a phone call or email that says, hey, pack your shit. You're flying out somewhere, because I saw the director this morning has said that they're going to bolster protection at the RNC. Trump's going to get, a more enhanced protection profile. So the first thing that's going to happen, is talk about all hands on deck. There's probably no agents in any of these field offices around the country, because a lot of people probably got some phone calls or text messages or emails that to get on a plane in a few hours. And, one thing that's not being talked about either, D, is when it's all said and done, and I meant to mention this earlier, Andy, those CS guys, they don't operate on a red light, green light. They operate under standard police, U.S. police use of force standards. The standard for that is a very famous case called Graham v. Connor, which outlines the police responses to perceived threats. So when it's all said and done, these agents are essentially cops, right? These CS guys are cops. So
they don't have special powers that allow them to break the ROE, as it were.
And so there is a criminal investigation right now into their actions. Did they use reasonable force? Did they violate the Fourth Amendment in killing this person? And there's a whole set of rules that go in with that. One of them is called garrity. So these officers are afforded what's called garrity, which is a famous court decision where you have to tell your agency, if your agency invokes your garrity rights, you have to tell them everything you did. But what you tell your agency can't be used against you in a court of law. They have to do a separate criminal investigation, if that makes any sense. So those guys that fired, they're subject to a criminal investigation. Now, obviously, they're going to be found that they used reasonable force, right? That guy had fired upon the former president. But still, and typically during police lethal force encounters, officers' badge and guns are confiscated and they're given legal counsel. So that's something that's not being talked about, that when it's all said and done, the guys that pulled the trigger up there are cops that took somebody else's life. Now, obviously, clearly, I think that was a reasonable use of force. 100% they're going to be found that they used reasonable force in accordance with the Fourth Amendment and various court decisions like Graham v. Connor. But, that's still very uncomfortable. I've known lots of people that have been involved in police shootings, and they, talk about how uncomfortable that is. Even when you're in the right, you still have to go through this criminal investigation. So that's one of the things, Dave. So David says Dave on the screen, but one of the things, D, the first thing is all these agents probably got phone calls and emails. Hey, you got to fly out. I don't care if it's your son's wedding. I don't care if it's your firstborn child being born. You better get on a plane. And then the second thing is this criminal investigation about the police use of force. So again, who says you guys don't have breaking news? So that's breaking news that nobody's talking about is, these officers that pulled the trigger are going through a criminal investigation. So, and then the third thing, it's there's going to be all these investigations about, hey, what happened? And they're going to have to figure out moving forward, are there ways we can mitigate this threat? Are there ways that we can not let this happen again? Because the Secret Service has a zero fail mission, right? Like this can't ever happen again.
Yeah, so I would say zero fails a good way, really good way to describe it. You really intrigued me with the comment about the Garrity. Is it a Garrity law? But it seems, if I'm right, it provides a means for law enforcement to really find out ground truth without all the paraphernalia of an investigation. In other words,
Yeah.
hey, time out. Tell us what happened. All right, this will not affect you, but tell us the truth so that we can prevent this happening again, or whatever.
Yeah.
Very
So
common sense. Yeah.
yeah, and so right, we have a right against self-incrimination in this country, right? You have Fifth Amendment protections, and you cannot compel me to provide you information that might incriminate me. But they had to carve out this niche in the law in the 70s in this Garrity court decision. I think it was Garrity versus New Jersey, or it was a court case in New Jersey. Garrity was the officer where his agency said, either tell us what we want to know or you're fired. And he got fired, and then he sued in this court case, this famous court decision that all law enforcement officers talk about, called your Garrity rights. And it's exactly right, Andy. So there's like a public safety exception there. So your agency wants to know, hey, did you use reasonable force? When you killed this person, when you shot them, when you tasered them, and you have to tell them what happened. But anything you tell them cannot be used against you later in a criminal case. There has to be a separate criminal investigation. And they talk about a wall. All right. So those two concurrent investigations, the investigators cannot talk to each other. All right. It's against the law. They can't speak with each other. So,
but they're within the same unit, as it were.
We're within the same unit. Yeah. So in this case,
they're firewalled. That's
right. There's a firewall there. So the CS officers that pulled the trigger, what they tell the Secret Service then can't turn around and go to the FBI and say, hey, guess what Andy Milburn told us? He told us XYZ. It can't happen. There has to be a wall there. So I imagine in the last 24 hours, there have been some very uncomfortable discussions between the FBI and the Secret Service. The FBI probably is demanding answers, but in that particular case involving the agents that pulled the trigger, they have rights. And again, they clearly followed their training. Right. They clearly followed the law. Yeah. They had every right to return force, but there is a procedure in this country we have to follow.
That's that shows an unusually high amount for any bureaucracy. That shows an unusually high amount of common sense. That the Garrity, I know. I mean, I get it. It didn't emerge as a safety mechanism imposed from above. It was, it was a guy challenging based on his own rights. But nevertheless, it's a tremendous safety mechanism. Because investigations drag on forever, and departments themselves kind of batten the hatches, don't they?
Yeah.
But I think a key part of this is it allows that agency to be open with the media in the sense of not, hey, he did this, it's just, hey, it's up for investigation, and there's no question of, are you wrongfully standing by him or rightfully standing by him? You've gone, there's a procedure that puts you, I haven't described it well, but I think it's a great system. I'd like to see that in the military,
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
wasn't there a lot of debate recently in the military about taking the UCMJ away from like the person's commander or the accused commander or something?
Yeah. That's for sexual assault. That's not, that's because that was a case of, the military officers had lost their right to investigate sexual assault. Initially you do what we call a PI, a preliminary investigation as commanding officer, and you no longer can do that, supposedly because so many officers have somehow fucked that up or tainted their influence. But I'm talking about investigations into deaths, accidental deaths, things like that, negligent discharges, things that go wrong in training or operations that result in blue on blue casualties, all of these things. The Pat Tillman case is a great example, right? The guys, I don't want to go into details of that case, but the guys knew basically what had happened or suspected what had happened. But in that whole sorry mess, the Army was embarrassed, the Ranger Regiment was embarrassed, and it caused unnecessary suffering for his family. But if they'd had something like Garrity, because the guys want to tell the truth when it's something like that. There's a period they want to, and but of course they don't want to. They don't want to
Yeah.
put away
Again,
forever.
we have Fifth Amendment protections in this country. You can't be forced to testify against yourself. So and that's, like I said, those officers that pulled the trigger, have probably already spoken with legal counsel. They're probably already represented. A lot of federal agents and officers are represented by FLIOA, which is called the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, which will provide legal counsel in major uses of force. So I'm sure they've spoken with their legal counsel and are represented by a lawyer.
Bill, let me ask you, are they out of the game now while this investigation goes on? I mean, I'm sure the investigation won't take like forever, but.
No, it's probably going to take forever, but
Oh, really?
they're I mean, every law enforcement agency in the country, if you're sworn and you carry a badge and a gun, which the uniform division officers are, that are, these guys that are part of the CS team there, that pulled the trigger, they're going to be relieved of their police powers. They're temporarily relieved. And again, clearly they did nothing wrong. They followed their training and the law, but there still is a procedure in this country when you take someone's life, and they're going to be relieved of their police powers pending an investigation. I mean, that's pretty standard protocol throughout the country. Now, I'll tell you, I went to a training class once, probably before you were born, D, in like 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
And
okay.
the guy teaching the class was this old retired Washington, D.C. homicide detective. And the guy had retired in like 1990, but he was now teaching. So he'd been retired, 15 years when he was teaching this class. And he said his first day on the job as a DC police officer was in the early 70s. And his training officer, he gets in the car, and this training officer, some old haggard, Vietnam vet who's chain smoking. And he says, "Hey kid, pull up into this bodega." And he gives the kid a couple bucks and says, "Go in and get me some smokes." Well, this brand new officer from DC police, he walks into this bodega and it's being robbed. He walks into a robbery in progress, pulls out his gun, challenges them, kills the two robbers, right? Kills the two robbers. And, their sergeant's called to the scene. And, within about 30 minutes, they pat him on the back and they're like, "Hey, great job, kid. Let's get back out there." And they go back in their car and start patrolling.
Wow.
We don't do that anymore in this country, right? Did
you get the coffee?
I don't know. I never asked but yeah, I mean, that's how it used to be. Back in the day, it was like, "Hey, great job, kid."
Like Dirty Harry. You just go and eat
exactly like that. And
hot dog.
let's also not forget, again, breaking news here. Let's not forget, it's easy to thump our chest, right? And say, "Oh, these guys took out a threat." But when you take somebody's life, that can have a traumatic effect. That's a significant life event for you, right? You took somebody's life, no matter how reasonable it was, no matter how legal, no matter if you did your job. These guys might have some trauma with that, so they're probably going to need counseling. A lot of agencies have mandatory psychological counseling after you're involved in a traumatic event as a first responder. I've been involved in lots of traumatic events, from, the death of a child. I was on a call a couple of years ago where a 4-year-old had her head crushed, run over by a car. And, my partner at the time scooped up this little girl and ran her to an ambulance, and he was covered in blood and brain matter of a little girl. So I don't care how tough you are, that's going to have an effect. And, he came to me and to our sergeant and said, "Hey, I need to go home and change my clothes, and I don't think I'm coming back the rest of this shift." Right? That has an effect on you. And I'm sure Jason and Andy, military guys, I'm sure you have some perspective on that, where, especially the first time you do take a life, right? It can be traumatic.
I think probably in the United States makes it even worse. I know people are going to criticize me for that, but what I mean by that is, when we deploy, we're in a context. We switch. It's not that everything becomes a target. Of course not, counterinsurgency. But the point is that your alert stature, everything goes up, and you are expecting threat, and you should have hardened yourself to taking casualties and taking life. I mean, that is part of the preparation, the bulletproof mind. If you're a good commander, you prepare your troops for that. I think it's so much harder, probably. I've never been a cop, but I imagine it's so much harder as a cop, for a number of reasons. Operating in a day-to-day environment, and then suddenly out of the blue being confronted with that kind of tragedy. I think that is probably more overwhelming, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you from personal experience, my daughter's 9. When she was just a few months old, I was called to the scene of a death of a child, and the child unfortunately had a terminal illness. The child was about 4 years old, had a terminal illness, and they were able to get a little bit of a heartbeat, race the child. I followed the ambulance to the emergency room, and I go into the emergency room, and I have a job to do, right? I have to figure out, was this child the victim of abuse? How did this happen? And so I'm speaking with the father outside the exam room and asking him, hey, how did this happen? And the dad says, listen, we have been to, every elite hospital in the country to try to find a cure. My son suffered from XYZ. As I'm interviewing him, the mom is in the room, or in the exam room. We could hear her wails and telling the son, hey, it's okay to let go. We love you so much. You fought so hard. I'm listening to that, right, as I'm interviewing the dad. And I try to be, right, I fancy myself a tough guy. You want to go work out, how fast we running, how much we lifting. I fancy myself a tough guy. That crushed me, man. I did my job, right? I found out that the child was not a victim of abuse. That was a terminal illness, and left that call. And I went in a parking lot and cried my eyes out, right? Called my wife, hey, can you go kiss our daughter for us? And cried my eyes out. And guess what? 5 minutes later, I get another call and I have to go handle that. So you're exactly right, Andy. It's a lot different than being in combat in the military, where you can go do your mission and then you go back to your base and maybe you play PlayStation or watch movies. In law enforcement, you got to go home. And it's just a different dynamic.
Yeah. Wow. Andy?
Well, that's an overwhelming moment I think to end on, because we did promise Bill that we would get him out of here in half an hour, and we had lied to him through the teeth, as we have done. But who's going to stop him, man? I mean, that was not just fascinating, but really impactful. I usually don't use that term. I hate it, but really was. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Bill, appreciate it.
Yeah.
And the rest of you for being here.
Thanks, Andy, so much. Really appreciate you.
Are there any questions, D? I know sometimes people post questions.
No, because this isn't live. So so this is gonna go out today, later today.
Hey, the only question we have, Bill, is we'd like to bring you on again, as this develops. That's not really a question. That was an instruction.
Yeah.
So
I got you.
Officer Colonel Milburn's back.
Yeah.
No, give your wife a heads up. I mean, that was terrific. Not just about this particular event, but I learned a ton. So
yeah. So listen, as this thing progresses, there'll probably be news breaking today, tomorrow, the next day. Yeah, D's got my number. Text or call anytime.
Will do.
I'm happy to be a resource. I'm a big fan. Every year I swear I'm going to make the damn Christmas party, and I just haven't been able to.
This year. Yeah.
Yeah, we all need to make a commitment to do it this year.
Yeah. I'm having a separate Kwanzaa party that you're invited to.
I will be there.
Coming.
There may be an eyes on might have its own social.
I got it. The real question is, why is Jack in Paris with the Frenchies?
He was actually in Ireland, and I think he went to Paris for like a stopover, or maybe for a few days with his daughter. And
okay.
He's back now.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, you guys use me as a resource. Call, text anytime.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Bill.
Awesome.
Thanks
a lot.
Hey, best of luck, guys.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Guys, don't forget a couple things, little housekeeping. Andy Milburn. Bill, do you have anything to plug? No, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys, I'm a senior consultant with Safe Haven Security Group. We do a lot of security consulting. I know some of your audience are probably not in the market for a security company, but we do a lot of Fortune 500 companies, physical security, executive protection, a lot of threat assessment, like I talked about, where we're really going into someone's background, whether a current employee, former employee, irate customer. You'd be surprised how many Fortune 500 companies out there, the people that they're hiring these days. And so, yeah, I'm a senior consultant with Safe Haven Security. We've recently done some pretty high profile executive protection gigs with some different individuals. I don't want to give their names, but
Sure.
but yeah, that's where I'm at now. Safe Haven Security Group.
Great. All right. So, Bill, shoot me that link, and the link will be in the description in the show notes. You guys can check it out there. Andy Milburn, of course, his book is great. Check out his previous episode that we just did with the Team House on Friday.
It was awesome.
Great, really good, what's been going on in the last 2 years, and an unbelievable Libya story where Andy did not follow the rules, but it worked out well.
Go figure.
Yeah. And patreon.com/the Team House. Please help support the show. YouTube is destroying us. I'm not lying. I swear to God. Patreon.com/the Team House. Thanks, guys. This is great.
Thanks, guys.
All the best,
Take care,
guys.
gents.